Whitney Houston didn't just grow up in a gospel family. She grew up in a house where a female family member sexually abused her for years while her deeply religious mother looked the other way, creating trauma that would drive Whitney to suppress her sexuality, marry a man she didn't love, and ultimately turn to drugs as the only escape from a lifetime of shame forced upon her by the very people who claimed to protect her. The abuse began when Whitney was a child in the 1970s, committed by someone the family trusted who had constant access to her. And Whitney stayed silent for over 30 years until a 2009 interview with Oprah Winfrey when she finally said the words that explained everything. It was a woman, and it was someone close to the family. But even then, she wouldn't name her abuser because the Houston family's code of silence was more important than Whitney's healing. This video reveals what Whitney told Oprah about the years of molestation, why multiple sources including Whitney's close friends have identified Dee Dee Warwick, Dionne Warwick's sister and Whitney's aunt, as the likely abuser who had unsupervised access to Whitney throughout childhood, how Cissy Houston's strict religious beliefs created an environment where Whitney learned to hide truth and perform perfection, why the abuse contributed to Whitney's confusion about her sexuality and her later relationship with Robin Crawford, how the family's refusal to acknowledge what happened forced Whitney to carry the shame alone for decades, what happened when Whitney finally tried to confront her trauma in the 2000s only to be met with family denial, and how the pattern of silence and suppression that began in Whitney's childhood ultimately led to the drugs that killed her at 48. The camera focused on Whitney's face. Oprah's studio. September 2009. Whitney Houston sat across from Oprah Winfrey for an interview promoting her comeback album. The questions had been mostly safe. The voice, the comeback, the future. Then Oprah shifted. There have been rumors for years about abuse in your childhood. Can you talk about that? Whitney's face changed. The performance dropped for a moment. Something real emerged. It's not a rumor, Whitney said quietly. It happened. Oprah waited. The studio silent. It was a woman. Whitney continued. And it was someone close to the family. Someone who had access to me. For years. Can you say who? Whitney shook her head. No, I can't. The family, it wouldn't. I can't. Even after decades. Even after the abuse had helped destroy her life. Even in 2009, 3 years before her death, Whitney Houston still couldn't name her abuser. Because in the Houston family, silence wasn't just expected, it was enforced. And breaking that silence, telling the truth about what happened in that gospel house in Newark, New Jersey, where God was praised every Sunday while a child was being molested during the week, would mean betraying the family code that had controlled Whitney since birth. So she stayed silent, protected her abuser, carried the shame alone until it killed her. The interview aired in September 2009. Whitney Houston reveals childhood sexual abuse, but the headlines focused on the wrong thing. They asked, who was it? Will she name them? Why won't she tell? The real question was, why did it take Whitney 40+ years to say anything? And why, even when she finally spoke, did she protect the person who'd abused her? The answer was simple and devastating, because the Houston family had taught Whitney from childhood that protecting the family image was more important than protecting herself. And that lesson that her truth mattered less than their reputation was the foundation of everything that destroyed Whitney Houston. The interview aired in September 2009. Whitney Houston reveals childhood sexual abuse, but the headlines focused on the wrong thing. They asked, who was it? Will she name them? Why won't she tell? The real question was, why did it take Whitney 40+ years to say anything? And why, even when she finally spoke, did she protect the person who'd abused her? The answer was simple and devastating. Because the Houston family had taught Whitney from childhood that protecting the family image was more important than protecting herself. And that lesson that her truth mattered less than their reputation was the foundation of everything that destroyed Whitney Houston. Newark, New Jersey, 19. Emily Cissy Houston was a gospel singer, respected, connected to church, part of the Sweet Inspirations backup group that sang with Aretha Franklin and Elvis Presley. The Houston home was religious, strict, church every Sunday, gospel music always playing, God in every conversation. Rules were absolute, obedience expected, image everything. Cissy's daughter Whitney was born August 9. Beautiful child, talented, showed singing ability early, but Cissy's parenting was harsh, demanding, perfectionist, love conditional on performance. Whitney learned young, please mother, hide problems, maintain appearance, never embarrass the family. The Houston Warwick family was gospel royalty. Cissy's niece Dionne Warwick was already a star. Aretha Franklin was Whitney's godmother. The family had reputation, connections, expectations. Everyone in the family was expected to uphold the image. Christian, moral, respectable, no scandal, Any problem, any truth that didn't fit the narrative was hidden, denied, erased. This was the environment where Whitney grew up, where performance mattered more than reality, where appearance trumped truth, and where abuse could happen for years because acknowledging it would damage the family reputation. Whitney never publicly named her abuser, but multiple sources close to Whitney, including friends and associates, have identified the same person: Dee Dee Warwick, Dionne Warwick's sister, Cissy Houston's niece, a singer herself, part of the family, someone who had constant access to Whitney throughout her childhood. Dee Dee Warwick died in 2008, 1 year before Whitney's Oprah interview. The timing of Whitney's revelation after Dee Dee's death was likely intentional. Whitney could speak about the abuse without directly confronting her abuser or causing family conflict, but even then, she wouldn't say the name. According to accounts from people close to Whitney, the abuse began when Whitney was approximately 7 to 10 years old and continued into her early teens. Dee Dee was often at the Houston house, family gatherings, rehearsals, visits. She had unsupervised time with Whitney. The abuse was opportunistic. When others weren't present, when Whitney was alone, Whitney was too young to understand what was happening, too afraid to tell anyone. And when she was old enough to comprehend it, she'd learned that family secrets stay hidden. Years later, Whitney described the impact in vague terms. She never gave specific details publicly, but she told close friends it left her confused about her body, about boundaries, about trust, and critically, about her sexuality. Childhood sexual abuse, especially by a same-sex abuser, creates profound confusion. Whitney later struggled with her sexual identity, attracted to both women and men, unable to fully embrace either because the abuse had tangled everything together. The trauma didn't just affect her sexuality. It affected her relationship with intimacy, trust, self-worth. It made her feel damaged, shameful, wrong. And when she tried to talk about these feelings, when she showed signs of same-sex attraction in her teens, Cissy Houston's response made everything worse. Cissy Houston noticed. Late 1970s, early 1980s. Whitney was in her late teens, showing signs of being attracted to women. There were whispers. Whitney spending time with a female friend. Too close, intimate. Cissy confronted Whitney. The conversation was explosive. According to accounts Whitney later shared with friends, Cissy's message was clear. You are not gay. You will not be gay. No daughter of mine will disgrace this family that way. Cissy's gospel background made her deeply homophobic. Homosexuality was sin, abomination, unacceptable. Whitney tried to explain, tried to talk about her feelings, her confusion. Cissy wouldn't hear it. Shut it down. Told Whitney to pray, to overcome these temptations, to be normal. But here's the devastating irony. Cissy knew about the abuse, or at minimum, suspected. Multiple sources have suggested Cissy was aware that Dee Dee had inappropriate relationships with children, that there were concerns, whispers in the family, but addressing it would mean scandal, confrontation, potential exposure. So Cissy, like the rest of the family, stayed silent, protected the image, let the abuse continue. Then when Whitney showed signs of sexual confusion, likely resulting from that abuse, Cissy blamed Whitney, told her to suppress it, pray it away. Cissy had failed to protect Whitney from abuse, then punished Whitney for the trauma that abuse caused. This double betrayal, failing to stop the abuse, then shaming the victim for its effects, was the foundational trauma of Whitney's life. Whitney was 16, almost 17. She attended a summer camp in East Orange, New Jersey. There she met Robin Crawford, age 19, working as a counselor. The connection was instant. Whitney had never felt this way before. Robin was confident, strong, protective. They became friends, then more than friends. By 1982, Whitney and Robin were in a romantic relationship, living together, in love. For Whitney, Robin represented safety, someone who loved her without conditions, without performance, without judgment. Robin didn't know about the childhood abuse. Whitney hadn't told anyone yet. But Robin sensed Whitney's trauma, the way she'd flinch sometimes, the shame she carried about intimacy. Robin was patient, gentle, let Whitney control the pace. For the first time, Whitney experienced what healthy love felt like, what it meant to be with someone who didn't hurt her, didn't shame her, didn't demand she be someone she wasn't. But the relationship couldn't stay hidden from Cissy. Cissy discovered Whitney and Robin together. The confrontation was devastating. Cissy was furious, disgusted, told Whitney this was exactly what she'd warned against, that this relationship was sin, that Whitney was throwing away her future, disgracing the family. Whitney was 18, still financially dependent on her mother, still seeking Cissy's approval despite everything. Cissy delivered an ultimatum. end the romantic relationship with Robin, or lose her family's support, lose her chance at a music career, lose everything. Whitney was trapped. She loved Robin, but she'd been conditioned her entire life to obey her mother, to maintain the family image, to suppress her true self. She chose the family, chose the career, chose the lie. Whitney and Robin's romantic relationship ended in 19, but Robin stayed in Whitney's life as her assistant and best friend. The relationship became platonic, officially, but emotionally, they remained deeply connected. Robin watched as Whitney pursued her music career, as Clive Davis signed her in 19, as her star rose through the mid-1980s, and Robin stayed silent about their past relationship, helped Whitney maintain the good girl image the industry demanded. But the suppression damaged Whitney, forcing her to hide who she was, pretend to be something she wasn't, live a lie to please her mother and the industry. The childhood abuse had taught Whitney that her boundaries didn't matter. Cissy's homophobia taught her that her authentic self was shameful. And the industry taught her that image was more important than truth. All of these lessons stacked on top of each other created a person who didn't know how to be real, who'd spent her entire life performing for others, hiding her pain, suppressing her truth. By 1985, Whitney Houston was becoming a star. Debut album, hit singles, beautiful, talented, America's sweetheart. Clive Davis and Arista Records carefully managed her image. Wholesome, classy, crossover appeal. The girl next door who could sing like an angel. Everything about Whitney was curated. Her clothes, her interviews, her relationships, her public persona. Behind the scenes, Whitney was struggling. The pressure to maintain perfection was crushing. She couldn't be herself, couldn't talk about her childhood trauma, couldn't acknowledge her sexuality, couldn't show any vulnerability. Every interview was performance. Every appearance was pretending. Every relationship had to fit the narrative. 1987, 1989. Whitney at her peak. I Want to Dance with Somebody. Greatest love of all. Biggest star in music. But cracks were showing. Whitney started canceling appearances, missing events, weight fluctuating, mood swings. Close friends noticed. Whitney was using drugs. Started with marijuana and alcohol. Ways to cope with the pressure, the secrets, the constant performance. By 1989, she was using cocaine occasionally. Not addicted yet, but using to manage stress and numb pain. The more successful she became, the more trapped she felt. The bigger the image, the more impossible to escape. 1989 Soul Train Awards. Moment that broke Whitney. She was nominated, expected to win. But when she appeared on screen, the predominantly black audience booed. They'd been criticizing Whitney for years. She sings for white people. She forgot where she came from. She's not black enough. The criticism was unfair. Whitney's crossover success was partly Clive Davis's strategy, not her choice. But the booing devastated her. Here's what the critics didn't know. Whitney was already struggling with identity. Abuse survivor, suppressed sexuality, forced into an image that wasn't authentic. And now her own community was rejecting her for not being black enough, while her mother had rejected her for not being straight enough. Whitney couldn't win, couldn't be herself, couldn't please anyone, couldn't escape. The drugs got heavier after 19. The smile got faker, the performance more exhausting. And Bobby Brown appeared at exactly the moment Whitney was most vulnerable. Whitney met Bobby Brown, R&B singer, bad boy image, trouble with law, complete opposite of Whitney's carefully managed persona. Bobby represented rebellion, freedom, authenticity, or at least what Whitney thought was authenticity. Bobby didn't care about her perfect image, didn't expect her to perform, let her be messy, imperfect, human. For Whitney, who'd spent her entire life being controlled by Cissy, by Clive, by the industry, Bobby felt like escape, but Bobby also had demons. Drug problems, infidelity, ego, immaturity. July 18, 1992. Whitney married Bobby Brown. Everyone warned her. Friends, family, industry colleagues. He'll ruin you. He's not good enough for you. This is a mistake. But Whitney married him anyway. Partly because she loved him, partly because he let her be imperfect, and partly, according to multiple sources, because marrying a man silenced questions about her sexuality. Robin Crawford was still in Whitney's life as assistant. Watch Whitney marry Bobby. Heartbroken but supportive. Cissy approved of Bobby at first. At least he was a man. At least Whitney was performing heterosexuality correctly. But the marriage was disaster from the start. Bobby introduced Whitney to harder drugs. Crack cocaine. By the mid-1990s, Whitney was addicted. Bobby's explanation later. She was already using when I met her. But yeah, I introduced her to harder stuff. I was using too. We used together. The marriage was also violent. Police called multiple times, both arrested for domestic incidents. Bobby's infidelity constant, multiple affairs, children with other women. But Whitney stayed. For 15 years she stayed. Why? Because leaving would mean admitting failure, would mean the perfect image was completely destroyed, would mean facing questions about why she'd married him, questions that might lead to truth about her sexuality. And because by this point Whitney was so deep in addiction and trauma that she didn't know how to leave, didn't know who she was without Bobby, didn't know how to be alone with herself, the drugs destroyed her voice. By the early 2000s, Whitney's performances were disasters. Missing notes, raspy tone, the instrument was damaged. Tours canceled, albums delayed, interviews where she appeared erratic and defensive. 2002, Diane Sawyer interview. Whitney gaunt, defensive, erratic. Famous exchange. Diane, is it alcohol? Prescription drugs? Whitney, first of all, let's get one thing straight. Crack is cheap. I make too much money to ever smoke crack. Let's get that straight, okay? We don't do crack. We don't do that. Crack is whack. But she was doing crack, and cocaine, and pills, and alcohol. The denial was complete. The performance still running. Even as she was dying in plain sight, Whitney finally filed for divorce from Bobby Brown. The 15-year marriage ended. For a moment there was hope. Maybe Whitney could get clean, recover her voice, heal, but the damage was too deep. The trauma too old. 2007. Whitney attempted comeback. Rehab, therapy, tried to rebuild her career. But she couldn't fully heal because she couldn't fully confront her trauma. The childhood abuse, the suppressed sexuality, the family dysfunction. Every attempt to address these things was met with family resistance. 2009, Oprah interview. Whitney's attempt to tell some truth. She revealed the childhood sexual abuse, said it was a woman in the family, but wouldn't name her. She talked about her struggles, her mistakes, her recovery. But when Oprah asked about her sexuality, about the persistent rumors of her relationship with Robin Crawford, Whitney deflected. Robin is my best friend, my sister, the one person who's always been there. But was there more? People want to make it more than it was. People want to talk. Let them talk. Even in 2009, Whitney couldn't say the truth. Couldn't admit that she'd loved Robin, that Cissy had forced her to hide it, that suppressing her sexuality had contributed to her destruction. The family code of silence was still stronger than Whitney's need for healing. After the Oprah interview, Cissy Houston was asked about Whitney's abuse revelation. Her response was dismissive. Whitney exaggerates. She's dramatic. These things happen in families sometimes. You move on, you don't dwell on it. No acknowledgement that Cissy had failed to protect Whitney. No accountability for the homophobia that had forced Whitney to hide. No apology for prioritizing image over her daughter's well-being. Just minimization, denial. The same pattern that had allowed the abuse to happen in the first place. Whitney tried to maintain relationship with her mother, kept seeking Cissy's approval even in her 40s, even after everything, because that's what abuse does. It makes victims keep returning to their abusers, hoping for the love that was never freely given. February 11, 2012, Whitney Houston found dead in bathtub at Beverly Hilton Hotel. Age 4. Cause of death? Accidental drowning, heart disease, cocaine use. But the real cause was deeper, older, more complicated. Childhood sexual abuse that was never acknowledged. Suppressed sexuality that was never accepted. Family dysfunction that prioritized image over truth. Industry pressure that demanded perfection over authenticity. Trauma that was never healed. Because healing required truth the family refused to allow. Whitney Houston didn't die from drugs. She died from a lifetime of being forced to hide, to perform, to suppress her authentic self in service of other people's comfort. The drugs were just the tool she used to numb the pain of living that lie. After Whitney's death, the family maintained silence. Cissy Houston published a memoir, Remembering Whitney. Defensive, protective of family image, minimal acknowledgement of abuse, no discussion of sexuality, no accountability. Bobby Brown gave interviews, blamed himself partly, but also blamed the family, the pressure, the secrets. Robin Crawford stayed silent for 7 years. Then in 2019 published her memoir, A Song for You, My Life with Whitney Houston. Finally, the truth. Robin confirmed. Whitney and I were lovers. We had a romantic relationship. It was real. It was love. Robin's account matched what Whitney's close friends had said for years. But it took 7 years after Whitney's death for Robin to feel safe telling the truth. Why 7 years? Because even after Whitney was gone, the Houston family power persisted. Cissy still controlled the narrative, still enforced the code of silence. The pattern continued even after Whitney's death. July 26, 2015, Bobby Christina Brown, Whitney's daughter, died at age 22. Found unconscious in bathtub, drugs in system, same method as her mother. Bobby Christina had witnessed everything growing up. The abuse, the drugs, the dysfunction, the secrets. She'd begged Whitney to leave Bobby, watched her mother destroy herself, tried to save her, failed. When Whitney died, Bobby Christina tried to get in the bathtub with her dead mother's body. Security stopped her. 11-year-old child traumatized beyond healing. 3 years later, Bobby Christina died the same way. The generational trauma completed its cycle. Today, Cissy Houston is still alive. Age 90, she's never fully acknowledged her role in Whitney's destruction. Never apologized for the homophobia, never taken accountability for failing to protect Whitney from abuse. In interviews, she maintains the same narrative. Whitney had demons, she made bad choices. Bobby Brown was bad influence, but the real demon was silence. The bad choice was prioritizing image over truth. The bad influence was a family that taught Whitney her authentic self was shameful. Gospel House in Newark, where it all began. Childhood sexual abuse. Never acknowledged. Never addressed. Young Whitney learning, hide truth, maintain image, protect family. Teenage Whitney loving Robin. Cissy's homophobia. You are not gay. Adult Whitney performing perfection, suppressing truth, using drugs to cope. Dead Whitney at 48. Bathtub, drugs, secrets still hidden. Bobby Christina at 22. Same bathtub fate. Generational trauma unbroken. The Houston family still doesn't talk about it, still protects the image, still maintains the silence. But the silence didn't protect Whitney. It killed her.